While we're in that rear axle area, I would suggest if you're anywhere near 100,000 miles, which most of us I would definitely suggest taking a real hard look at a new set of bearings.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
No. I would replace them when they go bad or give indication.
Okay. Well,
I changed my rear bearings at 135,000 miles just to test the new bearings they got.
mine rattled.
And that's because they weren't maintained properly or kept torque and all that stuff.
Yeah, those bolts loosen up.
Yep.
And if you don't check them,
When I took my original bearings out, one of them had a teeny tiny little spot that didn't feel perfectly smooth. But they'd have probably been good for quite a few more miles. My front bearings at 214,000 miles are still original.
Wow. But how often do you grease them?
You can't.
You
they're all
can't.
seals.
They're sealed bearings.
They're double roller. Double roller, single inner.
No. Change them.
I do the back, boy, I thought.
And to change them, it takes a tool of some sort to press them out, and press them in.
And
Don't they
if you
have
go-
to be heavy duty?
Not the front.
The front is standard both ways. Fronts will fit on the rear, but they won't last as long, but we don't know exactly what that number is. Roller bearings that were original equipment on the back are no longer available from anybody. All the companies have gone to a heavy-duty ball bearing. So nobody's had them long enough, we don't know what the expected life is gonna be. And that's the ones I keep a stock of at the house.
So the tapered rollers aren't even available anywhere?
No.
They keep selling it to a while.
You could probably get a little premium for them if you don't mind
I'm
selling.
gonna, the premium is I've got them on board. I keep one on board and one back at the house. And there's certain things that you wanna keep on board because when you're stuck in the boonies, you're not gonna get one.
Sure you are.
A rear wheel.
You call me and I'll mail you.
But you'll learn there's an ignition switch, a $10 ignition switch fix, there's a number of things.
Brake light switch,
Serpentine belt.
The serpentine belt.
tensioner Foley,
Yeah.
little thing. And when you go to the Rialta tech site, over into the wiki, on the left menus, there's a wiki page of recommended spare parts. And it's divided up for have to have, nice to have, and not on the road. And so you can kind of decide what you're willing to carry with you, and a lot of it is fairly lightweight stuff, so. And like I say, I tend to keep a lot of spare parts in the house. I've got about 30 rear bearings, 10 or 12 front bearing kits. The ones I have are in kits. So the bearing comes with everything needed to replace the bearing, except the tools and the labor. But if you come by the house and have me change it for you, I've got the tool and the labor is free, so.
It costs you some
Really?
Pepsi, it costs you
It
Pepsi.
costs you Pepsi.
You know, 2 cans of Pepsi per day. Not per job, but per day. So if you got 5 jobs and I can do them all in one day, it's only 2 cans.
And not seeing all of the, I have checked through all the problems about availability and getting the right.
Yeah, that's what we were just talking about.
Are you saying that I should not try to get them checked?
Well, you can have somebody look at them. They can jack up the back and they grab the wheel and see if it'll wiggle.
Well, that's
They can get the
bad.
wrench and check the center bolt and nut, and check the torque on it, make sure it's somewhere close to 148 foot-pounds. When I first got my rig, I knew about this 14 years ago. And so, right after I got it, I got the wrench out there and I checked, and it was, I had to turn it maybe a quarter turn to get the 148 foot-pounds. So it was a tad loose, but it wasn't so loose that it wore out the bearing.
On my first one, I put a socket on it to turn it, and I thought I had the wrong size socket, because it was that loose. And I tightened it up and drove out to a friend's house and checked it again, and it was loose again. What happens is the bearing becomes bad, it generates heat, and it messes with the locking mechanism on the lockdown, on the crown nut, and it won't stay locked. It won't stay locked, it'll loosen.
Anybody that's worked on older cars, usually on the rear, or even on the front, I guess, they have a castellated nut.
Yeah, Cassie.
That's a nut where you screw it on there, and it's got, you know, look like a little crown, and you screw it on there, and you torque it down to where it needs to be, and then you back off just a hair to get that to line up with the hole in the bolt. These don't have that. These use self-locking nuts, and they're both right-handed bolt nut combinations. And on the driver's side, when you're going down the road, it's trying to unscrew itself. And quite often it succeeds.
We have at least two rigs that I know of that they come up to a stoplight, luckily, and the wheel passed them.
We'll down the
There
road.
was one fella that came by the house, and he was on the highway, and his just
Kept on going.
kept on going and landed in a pond over there someplace. He never did, well, he had to go back several days later, and he did finally find it. But it was way on down the road from where he was.
Would you get
Went
warning?
across the median and everything.
You get the warning when the wheel passes.
It beats at you, going by.
That's a warning.
To me, the only warning I got was when I would jack up each rear wheel individually and spin it and listen. If you hear a little bit of in some degree of amplitude, that's a good indication you got a bad bearing, because the rumping sound is when it rolls over a place that is
Flat
bad.
spot.
Flat
Yeah,
spot.
flat spot is bearing. Kind of like on a railroad track, you hear a car going by, bloop, 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 and it's going by, similar. Jack up the other side, on the passenger side generally, it'll generally be quiet. Because the driver's
And you
side.
kind of compare the two, because
Yes, compare.
occasionally a rock or something will get caught in the brake dust shield.
Yeah.
And so when you spin it, it'll make noise, but it's more of a continuous noise.
Yeah, but it's a noise that you have, I mean, I've heard it all my life since I worked in shops when I was a kid. And those bearings never last, they was all the time. So,
Another thing, you can use an infrared thermometer
good point.
and check it after you've been on the highway for a while on a warm day,
And your tires haven't passed.
and your tire hasn't passed. You can check, depending on the type of wheels you have, you can check how hot that rear hub assembly is.
Basically, you want to point the
Baseline.
thermometer as close to the center of the wheel as you can.
Now, for
If you
those,
got plastic hubcaps on there, not so much.
if you have the steel wheels like our two old units had, I left the hubcaps off, because otherwise they'd be down the road. And once I would stop, I would go and just kind of touch it and just tap it for temperature. Go to the other side, check it, and if one of them's extremely
See how
hot,
close they are.
well, make sure it's not in the sun, you know, like on the constant, but they need to be fairly close.
Use the infrared thermometer, you can get closer.
If you got one.
But what you can do is go down, when you're going down the road, if one side's in the sun and one side is not, the ones in the sun are gonna be anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees warmer than the other side.
Surprising, but it's.
But you're looking for consistency front to back more than anything.
And once you take some readings, you have a baseline, and as you continue driving, if you keep checking, you'll see, you'll have the same readings, and then all of a sudden, one wheel will start to get hotter and hotter. That's the one you wanna start looking at.
There was a fella in Texas that, he had his Rialta in the shop up on the ramp, doing some work on it and stuff, and when he backed it out, he heard this god-awful grinding in the back. And so he jacked it up, and the wheel was going like this, so I went down there and I changed the rear bearing for him. He still had the good. And the rollers in there are supposed to be little cylinders in there, the roller bearings. And there are two sets on opposing sides. His all came out, they looked like practice arrow tips. They were rounded that much, totally rounded on the end of, on both sides. And so when I went to try to take it out of there, the whole thing just kind of fell out on the ground.
I know of a fellow that went into GNR in Forest City, heard a little noise, didn't think much of it. He pulls up into the line to check in, and all of a sudden, that was it. It froze up, right then. And he had to get another little shop to put a bearing in. Well, the shop was quite hard-headed, would not listen to him to get the right, correct roller bearing at that time. Put in a stock bearing he made it home and had to change the rear bearings again because the repairman did not listen. So you have to be,
And sometimes you gotta be a little stubborn as well, because there's more than a few mechanics that totally ignore anything you say. Try to explain to them what it needs, what it is, how it works, and they will just tune you right out, and it ends up costing you money, because usually you're traveling and half.
Don't you put two nuts on these bolts?
I do that now. Whenever I replace the rear bearings now, I save the old nut, because it comes with a new nut.
And that solves that problem?
So well,
Jim,
it should.
Okay, so it's
It's
still
an extra,
just in case.
it's insurance.
it's
And
insurance.
what I've actually started doing is, with the new nut, I put Loctite on it, blue Loctite. I torque it down, and then I hold one nut and double nut it with the old nut.
Right, you
So
did it for me, yeah.
it's double.
Yeah. So I should still check it anyway, occasionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to take the second nut off in order to actually check the torque.
Yeah.
But if,
Or just give it.
probably, yeah, you probably just
If you
wiggle
got
it
slop,
side to
you got
side
a
and
problem.
top to bottom.
If you can wiggle it, you're in trouble
You got a problem.
If it moves,
in the back.
I mean, I couldn't have done more than.
When you put
20,000 miles.
Loctite on a nut like that, does that change the torque on it? I mean,
The second
when
nut,
you're using Loctite on a nut,
No.
is that changing the torque?
as long as you torque it right away. It's made to stay liquid for a little bit. If you wait 20 minutes or half hour, it's probably gonna change it.
it still
I
takes
was
a step
thinking
by
like, you know,
Yeah,
you wouldn't want to
start to
grease
set
it
up.
when you're
But if
installing
you
it.
got it all ready to go together and you put 1 or 2 drops of Loctite in the nut and screw it on there, torque it down, no problem.
You said those, they were using, self-locking nuts
Yeah.
instead of encapsulated with safety wire through them.
Right.
Are those the ones with Delrin centers?
They're-
Or is it some
What they
other
did
kind?
was they used a crimper, and they crimped them on 3 sides.
Okay.
And so that is what's supposed to lock it on.
it's a cheap lock nut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But double nutting, when you get a package, you get a new nut with the bearing. So you can double nut them pretty
You
easy.
get a new nut, a big snap ring that holds the bearing in, and the little miniature bearing that holds the rotor on. You don't have to replace the rotor bearing. Occasionally, somebody, for whatever reason, will lose one before I get there to put the bearings in, so I just use the old one. I've actually taken a couple, well, I took one off maybe a year ago. I took the tire off and took the caliper off, and the rotor fell off because they hadn't put that little retaining thing. And it's just there to hold the rotor in place until you put the tire on, because the tire bolts go through the rotor into the hub. So,
Just coming back to welding up these,
Gusset plates?
what do you have to do to do that? You have to take, can it be done with
The-
it? Just take the wheel off, can they do it in place, or do you have to eventually get that whole back axle?
the best way to do it would be to remove the rear axle. And get it out, and you can take it to the shop, and then they can see what they're doing and actually access everything good. If you try to do it on the rig, then you gotta worry about spark, setting something on fire.
Burning a hose, or burning a
So
wheel.
it's not a
bearing,
easy
brake
job.
hose. And it's gonna take the welding guy longer to do the job. And at his rate, it's not worth it.
Yeah, and I guess if you talk about
But
preheating.
keep in mind,
all
that
that, so you've
if
got
you
to
have
take-
that done, you're gonna have to have new bearings, because they can't weld those on there without ruining the bearings that are in
Yeah,
it.
you wanna get the spindle isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not hard to
If you're
take
gonna
out.
preheat it,
It's a real process
Yeah.
for cast steel
Yeah.
to be able to do that
Okay,
properly.
I'll keep looking.
And
Hope-
that
hope
sheet
you got
on
some-
Rialta Tech, it's in the file section, it tells,
It's the
it's got the
information
specs,
section.
I think it's a low carbon steel.
I guess keep the weight down, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, that helps.
Got to dream big, or don't dream at all.